The Friday evening rush at Lumiere restaurant was in full swing when Gregory Hammond pushed through the heavy glass doors with his infant son screaming in his arms. His wife Victoria followed close behind, her designer dress wrinkled and her hair falling loose from what had once been an elegant updo. The other diners looked up from their plates, some with sympathy but most with barely concealed annoyance. This was supposed to be a quiet, upscale establishment where people came to escape the noise of everyday life. A crying baby was not part of the ambiance they had paid for. Gregory Hammond was not a man accustomed to helplessness. He had built a technology empire worth billions by solving problems that others deemed impossible. His company had revolutionized medical diagnostics and quantum computing. Presidents and prime ministers sought his advice. Yet here he stood, completely powerless against the relentless crying of his 3-month-old son Ethan. For 72 hours straight, the baby had wailed without stopping except for brief moments of exhausted sleep. They had been to 4 different pediatricians, 2 emergency rooms, and had even flown in a specialist from Boston. Every test came back normal. Every examination showed a perfectly healthy infant. But Ethan would not stop crying. Victoria was beyond exhaustion. She had tried nursing, bottles, different formulas, pacifiers, swaddling, skin-to-skin contact, white noise machines, car rides, and every piece of advice from every baby book ever written. Nothing worked. She felt like a failure as a mother. Her husband had important meetings that he kept canceling. Their nanny had quit after the second day, unable to handle the constant noise. The Hammonds had decided to come to the restaurant out of sheer desperation, thinking maybe a change of environment might somehow help. It was a foolish hope, but they were grasping at anything. Linda Martinez had been a waitress at Lumiere for 15 years. She had seen every kind of customer walk through those doors. Wealthy businessmen celebrating deals, couples on anniversary dates, families marking graduations and birthdays. She prided herself on reading people, knowing when to chat and when to leave them alone, when to suggest the expensive wine, and when someone just needed a kind word. As she approached the Hammond table with menus tucked under her arm, she saw something in their eyes that went beyond ordinary stress. These were not entitled rich people annoyed that their baby was inconveniencing them. These were terrified parents who had run out of options. She greeted them warmly and took their drink orders, not mentioning the crying or suggesting they might want to leave. Sometimes people just needed to be treated normally. As she turned to head to the bar, she noticed her daughter Maya wiping down a nearby table. Maya had started working part-time at the restaurant 3 weeks ago to help with expenses, while she finished her astrophysics degree at the university. Linda was incredibly proud of her daughter. Maya had earned a full scholarship and was doing research that Linda barely understood. Something about radio telescopes and deep space signals. The girl was brilliant, always had been, even if she sometimes seemed to exist in her own world. Maya froze mid-wipe, her cleaning cloth hovering over the table. She stood completely still, her head tilted at an odd angle, her eyes unfocused. Linda recognized that look. Her daughter had been doing that since she was a little girl, stopping suddenly as if hearing something no one else could detect. Doctors had tested her hearing and found it not just normal but exceptionally acute, able to perceive frequencies at the edges of human capability. As Maya had grown older, she had learned to harness this ability, using it in her research to detect patterns in astronomical data that even sophisticated computer algorithms sometimes missed. But this was different. Maya was staring at the crying baby with an intensity that made Linda nervous. She watched as her daughter slowly walked toward the Hammond table, abandoning her cleaning supplies. Maya moved as if in a trance, getting closer and closer to the screaming infant. Other staff members and diners began to notice the strange behavior. Gregory looked up, confused and slightly alarmed, as this young woman approached his family uninvited. Maya stopped 3 feet from the table. She closed her eyes and Linda could see her lips moving silently, as if counting or calculating something. The baby's cries filled the restaurant, loud and piercing, but Maya seemed to be listening to something else entirely. She stood there for almost 30 seconds, swaying slightly before her eyes snapped open. There was fear in those eyes, and excitement and confusion all mixed together. She looked directly at Gregory and Victoria, and spoke quietly, but clearly. The words she said made no sense to anyone listening. She asked if she could try something. Victoria looked at her husband with desperate, pleading eyes. They had tried everything else. What harm could come from letting this waitress's daughter attempt whatever she had in mind? Gregory nodded slowly, unable to think of any reason to refuse. Maya stepped closer to baby Ethan. She did not reach out to touch him or take him from Victoria's arms. She simply leaned down until her face was about a foot from the infant's red, tearful face. Then she began to hum. It was not a lullaby or any recognizable melody. The sound she made was strange, almost mathematical in its precision. It rose and fell in intervals that seemed calculated rather than musical. Some notes hung in the air longer than others. Some were almost too high to hear. Others vibrated deep in the chest of everyone nearby. The effect was immediate and impossible. Ethan's screaming began to quiet. His cries became whimpers, then stopped altogether. He opened his eyes wide and stared at Maya with an expression of intense concentration that no 3-month-old should be capable of. The silence that fell over the restaurant was profound. People at other tables stopped eating mid-bite. Staff members stood frozen with plates and glasses in hand. Gregory and Victoria stared in absolute shock. Maya held the humming for another 10 seconds, then gradually let it fade. Ethan remained quiet, making small cooing sounds, his tiny hands reaching toward her face. The entire restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. Then the whispers started. What did she do? How is that possible? Who is that girl? Did you see that? I have never seen anything like that in my life. Linda rushed to her daughter's side, both proud and concerned. Maya's face had gone pale and her hands were shaking. She looked at the Hammonds and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. She told them she needed to speak with them privately. What she had to tell them would sound impossible, but their son's life might depend on it. Gregory's business instincts, honed by decades of high-stakes negotiations, told him this was not a scam or a trick. This young woman was genuinely frightened. He made a decision that would change not just his life, but the course of human history. He agreed. The private dining room at the back of Lumiere was meant for business meetings and intimate celebrations, not for conversations that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Gregory and Victoria sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, with baby Ethan finally peaceful in his mother's arms. Maya sat across from them with Linda standing protectively behind her daughter's chair. The manager had agreed to give them privacy after seeing the condition of the Hammond family and the miraculous way the baby had quieted. He assumed it was some kind of medical emergency and was just grateful the crisis seemed to have passed. Maya's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and opened an application that looked like something from a science laboratory. Waveforms and frequency graphs filled the screen in colors Gregory did not recognize from any standard software. She placed the phone on the table between them and took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice was steady despite her obvious nervousness. She explained that she worked at the university's astronomy department as part of her degree program. Her specific research involved analyzing radio telescope data from deep space, looking for patterns that might indicate non-random sources. Most of what they detected was natural cosmic noise, radiation from stars and pulsars and black holes, but occasionally they found signals that made them pause and wonder. Victoria interrupted, asking what any of this had to do with her son. Maya's expression became even more serious. She told them that Ethan was not just crying. He was transmitting. Victoria's grip on her baby tightened instinctively. She asked what Maya meant by transmitting and transmitting what exactly. Maya tapped her phone screen and played back a recording she had made while humming to Ethan. The audio sounded like the baby's cries at first, but then Maya isolated certain frequencies and amplified them. Suddenly the room filled with a sound that made everyone's skin prickle. Beneath the crying was a pattern, a rhythm, a series of tones that pulsed with unmistakable regularity. Gregory leaned forward, his analytical mind racing. He built his fortune on understanding technology, and he recognized immediately that what he was hearing was structured. It was not random. He asked Maya how this was possible. How could an infant produce such a signal? Maya shook her head and admitted she did not fully understand the mechanism. But she had compared the frequency signature to her research database. She had found matches, signals recorded over the past 3 years from the outer solar system, beyond Neptune in regions where no human technology operated. Signals that her department had logged as unexplained phenomena and moved on from, assuming they were some unknown natural occurrence. Linda spoke up for the first time, her voice thick with worry. She asked if her daughter was saying that aliens were somehow involved with this baby. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Alien. It sounded absurd spoken out loud in a fancy restaurant in the middle of a normal city on a normal Friday night. But Maya did not laugh or backtrack. She said she did not think Ethan was alien. She was certain he was fully human. But something had made contact with him or through him. Something was using him as a relay point for a signal that was being sent outward into space. Victoria felt her world tilting. She was a rational person, a former attorney who believed in evidence and logic. But she had also spent 72 hours watching her son scream for no medical reason. She had seen this young woman stop the crying with a sound no human should be able to produce. She asked Maya the only question that mattered. What do we do? How do we help Ethan? How do we make this stop? Maya's answer was not comforting. She said they needed better equipment and more expertise. She needed to bring in her research supervisor and access the university's full analytical capabilities. They needed to understand what was being transmitted and why. Most importantly, they needed to do it quickly and quietly. Maya explained that if she could detect this pattern, others might be able to as well. She did not know who or what was on the receiving end of Ethan's signal, but she was certain that drawing attention to it before they understood it could be dangerous. Gregory made a decision with the same swift certainty that had made him successful in business. He told Maya that she would have access to whatever equipment she needed. His company had research laboratories with some of the most advanced diagnostic and quantum analysis tools in the world. They would set up a secure facility and bring in anyone Maya trusted. Money was not an object, time was. Victoria looked at her husband with gratitude and fear. Their son had become something neither of them understood, and they were about to invite more strangers into their crisis. But what choice did they have? Linda put her hand on Maya's shoulder and asked her daughter if she was absolutely sure about this. Getting involved with billionaires and mysterious signals and possible alien contact sounded dangerous. Maya could just walk away. Let these people handle their own problems. But Maya shook her head. She told her mother that walking away was not possible. Not anymore. She had heard the signal. She had responded to it with her humming, and the transmission had paused as if acknowledging her. Whatever was on the other end of this communication knew she existed now. More than that, Maya felt a responsibility. This was quite possibly the most important discovery in human history, and it had landed in her lap through pure chance. She was not going to ignore it. Gregory pulled out his phone and began making calls. Within 30 minutes, he had arranged for his company's secure research wing to be cleared and prepared. He contacted his head of technology and gave instructions that sounded deliberately vague, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Victoria held Ethan close, studying his peaceful face and wondering what was happening inside that tiny body. The baby looked so normal now, cooing and making the usual infant sounds. It seemed impossible that he had been screaming for days, even more impossible that he had been sending signals to something beyond Earth. Maya called her research supervisor, Dr. Henry Chen. She chose her words carefully, knowing how crazy she would sound. She told him she had detected a structured signal of possible non-terrestrial origin and needed his help analyzing it immediately. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Chen was a serious scientist who had spent 30 years in the field of SETI research and xenolinguistics. He had investigated hundreds of supposed alien signals and found mundane explanations for every single one. But he also knew Maya. She was his best student, careful and thorough. She would not make a claim like this lightly. He agreed to meet her. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Linda insisted on coming with them. Her daughter was involved in something that frightened her, even if she did not fully understand it. She would not let Maya face it alone. Gregory arranged for additional security and transportation. Within an hour, they were all headed to Hammond Technology's research campus on the outskirts of the city. Ethan slept peacefully in his car seat the entire drive, as if the last 3 days of screaming had never happened. But Maya sat next to him, watching, listening with senses the others did not possess. She could still hear it even in the silence. That underlying frequency, barely perceptible, pulsing through the baby like a heartbeat that did not belong to him alone. Something vast and impossibly distant had reached across space to touch this child, and Maya was terrified and exhilarated to discover why. The research facility at Hammond Technologies was a monument to cutting-edge science. 3 floors of laboratories filled with equipment that most universities could only dream of owning. Gregory had built this facility to push the boundaries of medical diagnostics and quantum computing, never imagining it would become humanity's first contact research center. Security was tight as they entered, with multiple checkpoints and biometric scanners. The few staff members working the late shift were surprised to see their boss arrive after midnight with a crying baby. But they knew better than to ask questions. Dr. Henry Chen arrived 20 minutes later, looking skeptical and exhausted. He was a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that had spent decades staring at computer screens full of astronomical data. He had devoted his life to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and had found nothing but silence and static. As he entered the hastily prepared analysis room, he carried the weariness of a scientist who had chased too many false alarms. Maya greeted him with a mixture of respect and urgency. She had already set up her equipment and had recordings ready to play. She did not waste time with explanations. She simply played the audio. The first recording was Ethan crying, recorded at the restaurant. To Dr. Chen, it sounded like any distressed infant. Then Maya applied filters, isolating specific frequency ranges and amplifying them. The hidden pattern emerged like a photograph developing in a dark room. The room filled with a sound that made Dr. Chen's breath catch in his throat. It was structured. It was rhythmic. It carried information encoded in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose. His hands began to shake as he grabbed Maya's laptop and pulled up his own analysis software. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen and Maya worked in intense concentration while the others watched. They ran the signal through every test and comparison they could think of. They checked it against known natural phenomena, against human-made transmissions, against every documented sound in their databases. Nothing matched. More importantly, when they examined the signal's characteristics, they found it was using a modulation technique that should not be possible with human vocal cords. The baby's cries were somehow being manipulated at a quantum level, carrying far more information than the acoustic sound alone could contain. Gregory watched the scientist's work and felt his worldview cracking apart. He was a man who believed in what could be measured and tested and proven, yet here was proof of something that should not exist. His infant son was serving as a transmitter for a signal from or to an unknown source. Victoria sat in a corner of the lab, rocking Ethan gently. The baby had been quiet since Maya's intervention at the restaurant, but Victoria could not shake the feeling that her son was no longer entirely hers. Something had claimed a piece of him, and she did not know how to fight it. Linda brought coffee from the facility's break room, feeling completely out of place among all the technology and genius. She was a waitress who had worked hard all her life to give her daughter opportunities she never had. Now that daughter was potentially making first contact with alien intelligence. It was too much to process. She sat beside Victoria, 2 mothers bound together by circumstances neither could have imagined. Around 3 in the morning, Maya made a breakthrough. She had been studying the moments when Ethan cried most intensely and discovered they corresponded with specific times of day. Not times based on Earth's rotation, but times based on the position of the solar system relative to certain stars. The signal was directional. It was being sent toward a specific point in space, approximately 40 light-years away in the constellation Cygnus. Dr. Chen pulled up star charts and felt his stomach drop. That region contained several potentially habitable exoplanets that SETI had monitored for years without detecting anything. Maya then demonstrated her humming technique, the sound she had used to quiet Ethan. She explained that she had instinctively created a counter-frequency, a harmonic pattern that interfaced with the transmission. When she hummed, the signal paused as if acknowledging her presence. Dr. Chen asked her to do it again while he recorded everything. Maya leaned close to Ethan and began her strange mathematical melody. The baby's eyes locked onto her face with unsettling intensity. The equipment in the lab went crazy. Readings spiked across multiple instruments. And then, for just a moment, they detected a response. It came through the quantum sensors that Gregory's company used for their experimental medical devices. A pulse of information, lasting less than a second, arriving from no detectable source. But it was there in the data, undeniable and impossible. Something had heard Maya's response and answered back. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. This was not a one-way transmission. This was a conversation. And humanity was now part of it. Gregory immediately understood the magnitude of what they had discovered. This changed everything. Every assumption about humanity's place in the universe was now obsolete. They had proof of intelligent alien life and active communication, but they also had a problem. His son was at the center of it, and they still did not know why or how. He asked the question that no one wanted to answer. Was Ethan in danger? Could this signal be harming him? Was there a way to stop it? Dr. Chen admitted he did not know. The signal appeared to be using quantum entanglement in ways that current physics said were impossible. Somehow, during Victoria's pregnancy, Ethan had become linked to something distant. The mechanism was beyond their understanding. But one thing was clear. The signal had purpose. It was trying to communicate. And based on the patterns Maya had detected, it had been trying for quite some time. Ethan's 3 days of crying might have been the signal finally achieving enough strength to be noticed. Maya suggested they needed to understand what was being communicated before they could decide how to proceed. The signal was not random. It carried structure that suggested language or mathematics. If they could decode it, they might learn who was sending it and what they wanted. Dr. Chen agreed, but warned that decoding an alien language with no reference point was one of the hardest problems in xenolinguistics. It could take years or decades. They might never succeed. But Maya had an advantage that other researchers did not. She could hear the signal naturally, perceive its patterns in ways that instruments could not fully capture. Her unique neurology, the same gift that had made her excellent at detecting anomalies in radio telescope data, now made her the only human who could truly interface with whatever was trying to reach Earth. She proposed spending the next several days in close proximity to Ethan, listening, learning, and trying to establish more consistent communication. Victoria's maternal instincts warred with the reality of their situation. She did not want her baby used as some kind of experiment, but she also recognized that Maya was their best hope for understanding what was happening to Ethan. She gave her permission but insisted on being present for everything. Gregory made arrangements for around-the-clock security and support. This facility would become their home until they had answers. As dawn broke over the city, none of them had slept. They stood in the lab surrounded by evidence that humanity was not alone in the universe. A 3-month-old baby had become a bridge between worlds. A waitress's daughter with extraordinary hearing had become their translator. And they all knew, though no one said it aloud, that there was no going back. Whatever happened next would change human history forever. The only question was whether humanity was ready for the answer they might receive. The next 48 hours blurred together in a haze of scientific discovery and mounting tension. Gregory had converted the entire 3rd floor of his research facility into a specialized analysis center. He brought in additional equipment, including quantum computers and the most sensitive audio recording devices money could buy. More importantly, he brought in people he trusted absolutely. 3 physicists who had worked with him for over a decade, 2 cryptographers who specialized in pattern recognition, a linguist who had written papers on theoretical alien communication. Each signed strict non-disclosure agreements, though Gregory knew that such legal documents would mean nothing if what they discovered became public. Maya barely left Ethan's side. A small nursery had been set up adjacent to the main lab, and she spent hours there with the baby, listening to patterns that no one else could fully perceive. Victoria watched this young woman bond with her son in ways that made her both grateful and jealous. Ethan responded to Maya unlike anyone else. He would track her movements with his eyes. When she hummed her strange frequencies, he would coo and reach for her. It was as if they shared a secret language that excluded everyone else, even his own mother. Dr. Chen coordinated the research teams with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. They had divided their work into 3 main objectives. First, map the complete structure of the signal and identify all its components. Second, determine how Ethan was able to produce and transmit it. Third, decode whatever message or information it contained. Each objective presented challenges that pushed the boundaries of current scientific knowledge. But they were making progress slowly and carefully. The mapping project revealed astonishing complexity. The signal was not a simple transmission but a layered communication system. There were carrier waves and embedded data streams. There were error correction codes built into the pattern. There were sections that appeared to be headers or identifiers. The sophistication implied technology far beyond human capability. Whoever had designed this system understood quantum mechanics and information theory in ways that made Earth's best scientists look like children playing with blocks. The second objective proved even more mysterious. They brought in medical equipment and scanned Ethan thoroughly. His brain activity showed unusual patterns, particularly in regions associated with auditory processing and rhythm recognition. But there was something else. Faint quantum signatures that should not exist in biological tissue. Dr. Chen theorized that somehow, during Victoria's pregnancy, Ethan's developing neural pathways had become entangled with quantum particles from an external source. But the mechanism remained unclear. Gregory remembered something that made his blood run cold. During Victoria's pregnancy, she had participated in a trial of experimental prenatal scanners that his company was developing. The device used quantum entanglement to create incredibly detailed images of fetal development. It was revolutionary technology, still years away from market approval. Gregory had pulled strings to get Victoria access, thinking it would provide the best possible monitoring of their baby's health. The trial had been halted after 3 months due to unexpected results in the quantum readings. Nothing that seemed dangerous at the time, just anomalies they could not explain. They had assumed it was equipment malfunction. He shared this information with Dr. Chen, who immediately understood the implications. The scanner might have accidentally created quantum links between Ethan's developing brain and particles in some distant location. If those distant particles were part of an alien communication system, it would explain everything. Ethan had not been chosen. He had been accidentally connected through human technology that reached farther than its creators realized. The revelation brought both relief and horror. They had done this to Ethan, however, unintentionally. Maya was making her own discoveries through direct interaction. She found that certain frequencies caused specific responses from the signal. When she hummed particular patterns, the transmission would change rhythm. It was interactive, responsive. She began to experiment, treating it like a conversation. She would create a pattern, wait for a response, try variations, keep notes on what seemed to work. Dr. Chen recognized what she was doing. She was establishing a proto-language, a basic communication system built on action and response. It was exactly how linguists theorized first contact might work. On the 3rd day, they achieved something remarkable. Maya had created a series of ascending tones, a simple mathematical progression, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She hummed it to Ethan while the equipment recorded everything. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the baby's quiet cooing shifted. The frequency changed, and in the quantum sensors, they detected a clear response, a pattern that echoed her progression but continued it. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Something out there had understood. Something had answered with mathematics, the universal language. The lab erupted in excitement and fear. They had just confirmed intelligent, purposeful communication with a non-human intelligence. Dr. Chen had tears running down his face. After 30 years of searching, he had finally found proof that humanity was not alone. The younger scientists were celebrating, but Gregory and Victoria just held each other, understanding that their son was now part of something far larger than their family. Linda watched her daughter work with pride and terror, knowing that Maya's life would never be normal again. Over the next week, they developed a basic exchange system. Maya would create patterns. The signal would respond. Slowly, painfully slowly, they began to establish common ground. Numbers first, then basic geometric concepts. Dr. Chen and the linguist worked to interpret each exchange, looking for deeper meaning. They discovered that the signal was not random messages, but appeared to be specifically designed for first contact. It contained redundancy and multiple layers of explanation, as if whoever created it anticipated the difficulties of communicating across species. They also discovered something unsettling. The signal was old. Analysis of its structure suggested it had been transmitting for years, possibly decades, waiting for someone to hear and respond. The quantum connection to Ethan had not initiated the signal. It had merely provided a better antenna, a way for the signal to finally reach human awareness through the baby's cries. The question became why. Why was something trying so desperately to contact Earth? What was so urgent that they had been broadcasting for years? Maya found partial answers in the patterns. There were elements that suggested warning, urgency, time pressure. Whatever was sending this signal believed Earth needed to hear it soon. Dr. Chen began to construct hypotheses. Perhaps they were warning of some cosmic threat. Perhaps they wanted to offer alliance or help. Perhaps they had their own agenda that required human cooperation. Without more complete understanding, they were just guessing. but the tone of the communication felt increasingly desperate. Gregory made a decision that he knew would be controversial. They needed more resources and more expertise, but bringing in additional people meant widening the circle of those who knew the truth. Every new person was a potential leak. He consulted with Dr. Chen and Maya, and they agreed. They identified key individuals, scientists and cryptographers who could be trusted and who had the skills needed to accelerate their progress. Within 2 days, the team had grown to 20 people, all working under strict security. Linda continued her role as support, making sure everyone ate and rested. She had become the unofficial coordinator of practical matters while the scientists focused on their work. Victoria spent her time between the nursery and the lab, torn between her role as mother and her recognition that Ethan was now part of something historic. She would hold her son and whisper to him, asking what he was experiencing, if he understood any of what was happening. The baby would just look at her with those too aware eyes and make small sounds that might have been ordinary baby noises, or might have been quantum-encoded messages to stars beyond imagination. As the second week began, they had made enough progress to attempt something ambitious. Maya had developed confidence in her ability to interface with the signal. Dr. Chen had identified what appeared to be greeting protocols in the alien pattern. They decided to try sending a more complex message, one that clearly indicated intelligent human response. Maya would create it. Ethan would transmit it, and they would wait to see if humanity's first deliberate message to alien intelligence received an answer. None of them could sleep the night before the attempt, knowing that what they did next might echo across the galaxy. The morning of the attempted transmission felt heavier than any morning Maya had ever experienced. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on everyone in the facility. They were not just sending a message. They were announcing humanity's presence to something unknown. Once that message went out, there would be no taking it back. No pretending they had never heard the signal. They would be committed to whatever response came. The team gathered in the main lab at dawn. Maya had spent the previous night composing her message with Dr. Chen's guidance. It was built from mathematical concepts they had confirmed the signal understood. Prime numbers, basic geometric progressions. But they added something new. Representations of Earth's location using pulsars as reference points. The same method humanity had used on the Voyager Golden Records decades ago. They were telling whoever listened exactly where to find them. It was an act of faith or foolishness, depending on perspective. Victoria held Ethan close and asked the question that had haunted her for days. Were they putting her son in danger by doing this? Dr. Chen admitted honestly that he did not know. The signal had been trying to reach Earth for years. Ignoring it might be more dangerous than responding. But there were no guarantees. They were making first contact protocols as they went, with no guidebook and no second chances. Gregory stood beside his wife and made the decision for both of them. They would proceed. The potential knowledge gained was worth the risk. But if at any point Ethan showed signs of distress, they would stop immediately. Maya took Ethan from Victoria's arms. The baby had grown comfortable with her over the past 2 weeks. He smiled when he saw her face and reached for her hair with tiny fingers. She carried him to the center of the lab where every piece of recording equipment was focused. Quantum sensors surrounded them. Audio recorders captured every frequency. Cameras documented the moment from multiple angles. History was about to be made, and they wanted every detail preserved. She began to hum. The pattern started simple, a greeting sequence they had practiced. Then it built in complexity, adding the new information layer by layer. The location data, the confirmation of intelligent response, the indication that humanity was ready for further communication. Maya's voice carried frequencies that touched the edges of human hearing and beyond. Ethan, responding to her sound, began to make his own noises. Not crying this time, but cooing and gurgling that carried the quantum signature they had learned to detect. The transmission lasted 3 minutes. When Maya fell silent, the room held its breath. They had sent humanity's first deliberate message to an alien intelligence. Now they waited to see if anyone was listening. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The equipment hummed quietly. Scientists stared at monitors, watching for any change. 10 minutes became 20. Doubt began to creep in. Perhaps the signal was automated. Perhaps there was no one actually monitoring it. Perhaps their message had simply vanished into the void. Then the quantum sensors exploded with activity. Data flooded in so fast the computers struggled to process it. The response came not through radio waves or any conventional means, but through the same quantum entanglement that connected Ethan to something distant. It arrived instantaneously, ignoring the light speed limit that should have governed any communication across 40 light years. The implications of that alone would revolutionize physics. But no one was thinking about theory. They were focused on what the message contained. Dr. Chen and his team worked frantically to decode the flood of information. It was not simple patterns this time. It was complex, multi-layered, and clearly structured like language. After an hour of analysis, they began to extract meaning. The message contained mathematical proofs they could verify, star charts showing multiple star systems and planets, diagrams that appeared to represent technology or perhaps ships, and something that made everyone in the room go silent. Warning symbols, danger indicators, urgency markers repeated throughout the transmission. Maya studied the patterns and felt understanding dawn. She explained to the others what she was perceiving through her unique hearing. The message was not from a single source, but from multiple sources. A group, a collection, a coalition. The signal they had been detecting was not one civilization trying to contact Earth, but many working together. They had been attempting communication for decades, growing increasingly urgent. And the reason for that urgency was becoming clear in the decoded message. Earth was in danger. The team spent the rest of the day extracting every piece of information they could from the response. The picture that emerged was staggering. The coalition consisted of multiple spacefaring civilizations who had established a policy of non-interference with developing species. They watched and monitored but did not make contact until certain criteria were met. Technological advancement combined with signs of wisdom and restraint. Humanity was approaching that threshold but had not crossed it yet. The quantum accident with Ethan had provided an unexpected opportunity for early contact. But there was a problem. Another species, not part of the coalition, had also detected Earth's growing technological signature. This other species did not share the coalition's peaceful philosophy. They viewed emerging civilizations as threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. The coalition's analysis suggested this hostile species would arrive in Earth's vicinity within a single generation. Possibly less. Humanity needed to prepare. The coalition was offering knowledge, technology, and alliance, but Earth had to actively choose to accept. Free will was paramount. They would not impose contact. The weight of this information was crushing. Gregory felt it physically, as if the air had grown thicker. They were holding knowledge that affected every human being alive and yet to be born. A threat was coming that could end human civilization, but help was being offered by aliens whose motives they could not fully understand. The decision of how to respond, who to tell, and what to do next fell on a small group of people who had never asked for this responsibility. Victoria took Ethan back and held him tightly. Her son had become the communication bridge that brought this news to Earth. She thought about his future, about the world he would grow up in. Would it be a world preparing for war with alien invaders, or a world learning from advanced alien mentors? Or would it be a world that tore itself apart in panic when the truth became known? Every scenario terrified her. Dr. Chen raised the question they had all been avoiding. Who did they tell? This was information that belonged to all humanity, but it was also information that could cause mass panic. Governments would want to control it. Military forces would want to weaponize it. Religious institutions would struggle to incorporate it into their worldviews. Scientists would demand open access to the data, and ordinary people would simply be terrified. The team debated long into the night. Maya offered a perspective that others had not considered. She pointed out that the coalition had addressed her directly in their message. They had identified her as the one who hears, the translator. They had made clear that they would communicate through her. That meant the choice of how to proceed was partly hers to make. It was a responsibility she had never wanted, but it was one she could not ignore. She was humanity's first contact specialist by accident of her unique neurology. Linda listened to her daughter claim this role and felt her heart break and swell with pride simultaneously. Maya was 22 years old. She should be worried about exams and dating and normal young adult concerns. Instead, she was negotiating humanity's entry into a galactic community. It was too much for anyone, especially her baby girl. But Maya had always been different, always heard things others missed. Perhaps this moment was what her entire life had been preparing her for. Gregory proposed a compromise. They would approach the government quietly and present their findings to a small, trusted group. Scientists, military advisors, and political leaders who could handle the information responsibly. They would advocate for controlled disclosure to the public within a short time frame. The coalition had been clear that they would not work with a humanity kept in the dark by its leaders. Transparency was required. But transparency did not have to mean chaos. It could be managed carefully. The next morning, Gregory used his considerable influence to arrange a meeting at the highest levels of government. He called in every favor, used every connection, and made clear that what he had to share was more important than anything else currently on anyone's agenda. Within 3 days, they had a meeting scheduled. Maya, Dr. Chen, Gregory, and Victoria would present their findings to a small group including the president, key cabinet members, top scientists, and military leaders. It was the most important presentation any of them would ever give. As they prepared for the meeting, Maya spent time with Ethan, listening to the ongoing signal. The coalition was maintaining contact now, waiting for humanity's response to their offer. Maya hummed back, simple acknowledgments that they had received the message and were considering. She wondered what they looked like, these beings from other worlds, how they thought, what their lives were like, and she wondered if humanity was capable of rising to the challenge they represented. History suggested humans. The secure conference room deep beneath a government building had hosted discussions about nuclear weapons, terrorist threats, and military operations. But it had never hosted a conversation about alien contact until now. The people gathered around the long table represented the highest levels of American leadership. The president sat at the head, flanked by the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Scientists from NASA and the Department of Energy had been called in. Everyone had signed additional security oaths before entering. No phones, no recordings, no leaks. Gregory Hammond stood at the front of the room with a presentation that would sound like science fiction, if not for the evidence he was about to show. Maya sat beside Dr. Chen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had never imagined being in a room like this with people like this. Victoria held Ethan, who had been surprisingly quiet during the security screening. The baby seemed to sense the importance of the moment, or perhaps the signal that moved through him recognized it. Linda had been allowed to attend at Maya's insistence. She sat in the back, watching her daughter prepare to change the world. Gregory began without preamble. He explained the experimental prenatal scanner, the quantum entanglement accident, and Ethan's 3 days of impossible crying. He played the audio recordings, both the raw baby cries and the filtered versions that revealed the hidden signal. He showed the spectrographic analysis, the quantum signatures, and the pattern matches to deep space signals recorded over years. The room was silent except for his voice and the occasional sound of someone shifting in their chair. Then he brought Maya forward. She was nervous but determined. She explained her background in astrophysics and her unique auditory abilities. She demonstrated by playing sections of the signal and identifying patterns that the others in the room could not consciously perceive. Then she asked permission to demonstrate direct contact. The president, a pragmatic woman who had built her career on evidence-based decisions, nodded. "Show us," she said. Maya approached Ethan and began to hum. The strange mathematical frequencies filled the room. The baby responded immediately, making sounds that seemed almost like speech. Then Maya changed her pattern, making it a question rather than a greeting. The equipment that Gregory's team had set up registered the response. Data appeared on screens around the room. The quantum sensors showed activity that should not be possible. And in that moment, everyone present understood. This was real. This was happening. Humanity was in contact with something not human. Dr. Chen took over the presentation, walking through the decoded messages. He explained the coalition of civilizations. He showed the star charts they had provided, which astronomers in the room confirmed matched real stellar configurations. He presented the mathematical proofs they had sent, which physicists verified as valid and elegant. Then he reached the difficult part, the warning about the hostile species approaching Earth, the timeline of roughly 1 generation, the offer of alliance and assistance. The room erupted. The Secretary of Defense wanted to know about the nature of the threat, military capabilities, numbers, weaknesses. The National Security Advisor demanded to know why they should trust beings they had never met. The NASA scientists wanted access to all data immediately. The president raised her hand and silence fell. She looked directly at Maya and asked the question that mattered most. In your assessment, is this offer genuine? Are they really trying to help us, or is this some kind of manipulation? Maya chose her words carefully. She explained that she had spent weeks listening to the signal, learning its patterns. Communication carried emotional weight even across species. She could hear urgency in the patterns. Concern. Hope. The coalition genuinely seemed to want Earth to survive and join them. But she also admitted that her understanding was incomplete. She could not read alien minds. She could only interpret what she perceived. The risk of deception existed. But the risk of ignoring a genuine warning seemed greater. The president asked Dr. Chen for his opinion. The old scientist spoke with the gravity of his 3 decades searching for this moment. He said that the scientific evidence was overwhelming. The technology displayed in the communication was far beyond human capability. If this was a deception, it was being carried out by beings who did not need deception to harm Earth. They clearly possessed capabilities that made humanity insignificant by comparison. If they wanted to destroy or conquer Earth, they would not need elaborate tricks. The logical conclusion was that the offer was sincere. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happens if we refuse? If we say no to this coalition and their offer? Dr. Chen admitted they did not know for certain. The coalition had been clear that they respected free will. They would not impose contact or assistance, but that would leave Earth alone to face the approaching hostile species. And based on the technological gap implied by the coalition's communication methods, humanity would face that threat with primitive weapons and no preparation. Gregory added his perspective as someone who understood risk and reward. He said that refusing the offer meant betting that the warning was false. That seemed unwise given the evidence. Accepting the offer meant inviting massive change to human society. Contact with advanced alien civilizations would transform everything: economics, politics, religion, science, culture. Nothing would remain untouched. But the alternative might be extinction. When faced with those choices, the logical path seemed clear. The president turned to her advisors and began the most important policy discussion in human history. They debated for hours. Some argued for accepting the coalition's help, while keeping it secret from the public. Others insisted that was impossible and immoral. The coalition had explicitly stated they would not work with Earth if humanity remained ignorant of the truth. Others suggested accepting help, but attempting to steal or reverse engineer alien technology for human advantage. The scientists explained why that would likely fail and certainly destroy any trust. Eventually, a consensus emerged. They would accept the coalition's offer of alliance and assistance, but they would do so on behalf of all humanity, not just one nation. The president would coordinate with other world leaders before giving a final response, and they would prepare for public disclosure within 1 month. That gave them time to plan how to present the information, how to manage the inevitable panic, and how to begin the transformation of human society that contact would require. Maya was asked if she could communicate Earth's preliminary acceptance to the coalition, while emphasizing that full commitment required more time for humanity to prepare. She said she would try. That evening, back at Gregory's facility, she composed a message with Dr. Chen's help. It expressed gratitude for the warning and the offer. It indicated Earth's intention to accept but requested patience during a transition period. It asked for more information about the approaching threat and about the coalition itself. And it promised a more complete response within weeks. She hummed the message to Ethan, who transmitted it through whatever impossible connection linked him to distant stars. The response came within minutes. The coalition acknowledged Earth's preliminary acceptance. They expressed understanding about humanity's need for time. They began transmitting detailed information about themselves, their history, their technologies, and most urgently, about the species approaching Earth. The amount of data was staggering. It would take months to process completely. But the basic facts were clear and terrifying. The hostile species called themselves by a name that translated roughly as the Harvesters. They had existed for thousands of years, spreading through space by consuming the resources and knowledge of younger civilizations. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply took what they wanted and moved on. Earth had been detected because of quantum communications experiments and nuclear weapons tests, signals that marked a civilization reaching technological adolescence. The harvesters viewed such civilizations as threats to eliminate before they could mature into competitors. The timeline was confirmed. Analysis of their travel patterns suggested they would reach Earth's solar system in approximately 25 to 30 years. That seemed like a long time, but the coalition explained it was barely enough. Humanity needed to advance decades or centuries worth of technology. They needed to build defenses. They needed to achieve social unity sufficient to face an existential threat. And they needed to do all of this while undergoing the psychological shock of learning they were not alone in the universe. The coalition offered teachers, advisors, and technology sharing, but they were clear about limitations. They could not fight Earth's war for them. The harvesters were too numerous and too dangerous. Direct intervention would only draw the coalition into a conflict they might not survive. But they could help Earth develop the means to defend itself. They could provide knowledge that would take centuries to develop naturally. They could offer alliance with other worlds who had faced and survived similar threats. It was more help than humanity had any right to. The month that followed the initial government briefing was a whirlwind of international diplomacy conducted in absolute secrecy. The president contacted world leaders through secure channels, arranging private meetings that official schedules listed as economic summits or security consultations. Prime ministers, presidents, and premiers arrived at secure locations to be shown the same evidence that had convinced American leadership. Some believed immediately. Others required extensive proof. A few suspected it was an elaborate American trick until their own scientists examined the data and confirmed its authenticity. Maya found herself traveling the world as the living demonstration of alien contact. She would enter rooms full of skeptical leaders and scientists, approach baby Ethan, and establish communication with beings light years away. The quantum sensors would light up. The impossible data would flow, and skepticism would transform into shock and then into frantic activity. Every nation wanted access to the coalition's knowledge. Every military wanted defensive technology. Every scientist wanted to understand the physics that made faster-than-light communication possible. But the coalition remained firm in their requirements. They would share knowledge with all humanity or none. They would not play favorites among nations, and most critically, they would not work with Earth unless the general public was informed. They had watched too many civilizations tear themselves apart through elite secrecy and manipulation. For humanity to survive what was coming, it needed unity. Unity required truth. There could be no exceptions. This created fierce debate among world leaders. Some wanted to maintain secrecy indefinitely, believing the public could not handle the truth. Others argued for immediate disclosure, citing both moral obligation and practical necessity. The disagreements nearly derailed the entire process. The Chinese premier walked out of one meeting, insisting that his nation's security required keeping the information classified. The Russian president demanded guarantees that his country would receive equal access to alien technology. Smaller nations feared being left behind in the scramble for advanced knowledge. Gregory used his business experience to help broker compromises. He understood negotiation and the art of making everyone feel they had won something. He proposed a disclosure timeline that gave every nation time to prepare their populations. He suggested creating an international body to coordinate technology sharing and defense planning. He offered to fund educational initiatives that would help people process the coming changes. Slowly, grudgingly, consensus formed. Dr. Chen worked with scientific teams from around the world to prepare humanity for the knowledge dump that was coming. The coalition had centuries of physics, biology, engineering, and cosmology to share, but humans would need frameworks to understand it, foundations to build upon. He organized the information into progressive levels, starting with concepts that were just beyond current human knowledge and building toward the truly revolutionary discoveries. It would still be overwhelming, but at least it would be structured. Victoria and Ethan remained at the center of it all. The baby's unique quantum connection continued to serve as Earth's primary communication channel. Victoria had made peace with her son's unusual role, recognizing that he had been given a purpose that would shape human history. She worked with child development specialists to ensure Ethan remained as normal as possible, despite the extraordinary circumstances. The quantum connection would fade as he grew older, and his brain developed beyond its current state. But for now, he was irreplaceable. Linda watched her daughter become one of the most important people on Earth with mixed emotions. Maya was invited to speak at the United Nations. World leaders sought her counsel. Scientists treated her as a colleague despite her young age. But Linda worried about the toll it was taking. Maya was exhausted, sleeping only a few hours each night. She had abandoned her university studies completely. Her personal life had vanished. She lived and breathed alien contact, translating signals and helping prepare humanity for disclosure. It was too much for anyone, but especially for a 22-year-old who had been a waitress just weeks before. As the chosen date for public disclosure approached, tensions mounted. Governments prepared emergency response plans for civil unrest. Mental health services braced for a wave of existential crises. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile their teachings with the reality of alien civilizations. Financial markets were quietly stabilized to prevent panic selling when the news broke. Every detail was planned meticulously, but everyone involved knew that chaos was inevitable. Humans did not handle paradigm shifts well. 3 days before the scheduled announcement, Maya received a message from the coalition that changed everything. They had been monitoring Earth's preparations and were concerned. The level of government control and planning felt too much like manipulation. They wanted disclosure to be genuine, not managed. They suggested an alternative. Let Maya make the announcement directly to the world. Let her show the public exactly what she had shown world leaders. Let humanity see first contact through the eyes of someone who was one of them, not through the filter of politicians and bureaucrats. The suggestion caused immediate controversy. Government officials insisted it was too risky. They argued that Maya lacked the authority and experience to handle such a critical communication. But Maya surprised everyone by agreeing with the coalition. She told the assembled leaders that they had been treating disclosure as a crisis to manage rather than a truth to share. People deserved honesty delivered honestly, not carefully crafted messages designed to minimize panic. She would do it the coalition's way, with or without official approval. The president made a decision that defined her leadership. She agreed. She would appear alongside Maya, lending official authority to the announcement. But Maya would speak first, presenting the evidence and the choice before humanity in her own words. Other world leaders would follow with their own statements, confirming that this was not an American story but a human story. It was risky and terrifying and probably the right thing to do. The night before the broadcast, Maya could not sleep. She stood in the facility's observation deck, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the billions of people who would soon learn that everything they thought they knew was incomplete. She thought about religious believers whose faith would be challenged. She thought about children who would grow up in a universe much larger and more dangerous than their parents had known. She thought about the harvesters coming and whether humanity could really unite enough to survive. Linda found her there in the darkness and sat beside her daughter without speaking. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, sharing silence before the world changed forever. Finally, Maya spoke. She said she was scared. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of causing panic. Scared of being responsible for whatever happened next. Linda took her daughter's hand and reminded her of something simple. Maya was not responsible for what happened. She was just the messenger. She had heard a signal that others missed. She had responded with courage and honesty. What humanity chose to do with that information was not her burden to carry alone. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The broadcast would happen at noon, timed so that it would reach every time zone during waking hours. Every television network on Earth had agreed to carry it simultaneously. Streaming services would host it. Radio stations would broadcast it. Internet platforms would feature it. There would be no escaping the message. Humanity would learn the truth all at once. Maya stood in the broadcast studio with Ethan in her arms. Victoria stood beside her, lending maternal credibility to the scene. Dr. Chen waited nearby with equipment to demonstrate the signal. The president stood ready to follow Maya's statement with official confirmation. Gregory had released a prepared statement from his company, taking responsibility for the quantum scanner accident and pledging his resources to whatever came next. Everything was ready. There was no going back. As the cameras went live and the red lights indicated they were broadcasting to billions, Maya took a deep breath and began to speak. She introduced herself simply. She was a waitress's daughter, a university student studying astrophysics, someone who had been given an extraordinary gift of hearing. And 3 weeks ago, that gift had led her to discover something that changed everything she thought she knew about the universe. She paused, holding Ethan close, and then spoke the words that would echo through human history. We are not alone. We have never been alone, and it is time for humanity to know the truth. Maya's voice carried across the world through satellites and fiber optic cables, reaching into homes and offices and public squares where people had gathered to hear what their governments had promised. Was the most important announcement in history. She spoke plainly, without scientific jargon or political hedging. She told them about the crying baby that would not stop, about the signal she had heard hidden in those cries, about the weeks of research that confirmed what seemed impossible, about the coalition of alien civilizations who had been trying to contact Earth for years. She did not sugarcoat the difficult parts. She explained about the harvesters, the hostile species approaching Earth. She gave the timeline, 25 to 30 years until they arrived. She described what the coalition had told her about previous civilizations that had faced the harvesters and failed. She made clear that this was not a distant theoretical threat, but a real and present danger to human survival. But she also spoke about the offer of help, about the knowledge and technology the coalition was willing to share, about the chance for humanity to join a community of worlds that had learned to coexist peacefully. Then she demonstrated. She held Ethan close and began to hum her strange mathematical frequencies. The baby responded, making sounds that were recorded and displayed on screens beside her. Dr. Chen showed the quantum sensor readings, the impossible data flowing between Earth and something 40 light-years away, arriving instantaneously in defiance of physics as humanity understood it. She sent a greeting on behalf of all watching, and the response came within seconds. Symbols appeared on screens around the world. Mathematical patterns that the coalition had confirmed were universally comprehensible. Proof that this was real, that contact had been made, that humanity was being welcomed into something vast and ancient. Maya then stepped aside and let the president speak. The leader of the United States confirmed everything Maya had said, and added that every government on Earth had examined the evidence and reached the same conclusion. This was genuine. This was urgent. This was the choice that faced humanity: accept the coalition's help and commit to becoming part of a galactic community, or refuse and face the harvesters alone with technology that was centuries behind what would be needed. She made clear that this was not a decision that governments alone could make. This affected every human being. Every voice mattered. Other world leaders followed with their own statements. The Secretary General of the United Nations announced the formation of a new international body to coordinate humanity's response and manage the integration of alien knowledge. Religious leaders from multiple faiths spoke about what this meant for their traditions, offering frameworks for understanding that allowed room for both faith and the new cosmic reality. Scientists explained what little they had learned about the coalition's technology and how it would revolutionize human capabilities. Military leaders were honest about the threat humanity faced, but confident that with help, Earth could mount a defense. The broadcast lasted 3 hours. By the end, nearly every human being with access to information technology had heard the news. The response was everything predicted and more. In some places, panic erupted. People flooded into streets, some in celebration, others in fear. Religious extremists declared the aliens demons or tests of faith. Conspiracy theorists insisted it was all a government hoax despite the evidence. Financial markets crashed before emergency measures stabilized them. But underneath the chaos, something else emerged. Wonder, hope, a sense that humanity had reached a turning point. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people shared their excitement about alien contact. Others expressed terror about the approaching harvesters. Many simply tried to process what it meant that everything they had believed about humanity's place in the universe was wrong. But gradually a consensus began forming. If this was real and the evidence suggested it was, then humanity had no choice. Refusing help meant extinction. Accepting help meant change, but change with a future. The choice was survival or pride, and most people chose survival. Over the following weeks, the coalition began their promised knowledge sharing. It started with physics and mathematics, concepts that built on what humanity already understood. Teams of scientists around the world worked 20-hour days absorbing information that reshaped entire fields of study. The coalition explained quantum entanglement in ways that made faster-than-light communication possible. They shared principles of energy generation that would make fossil fuels obsolete. They provided medical knowledge that would extend human lifespans and cure diseases. It was overwhelming and glorious and sometimes terrifying in its implications. Maya remained at the center of it all, the translator between human and alien understanding. Her unique neurology made her essential to the communication process. She worked with linguists and scientists to create better interfaces between human technology and the coalition's systems. Slowly, the quantum connection through Ethan became less necessary as humanity developed its own communication methods. The baby's role diminished as he grew, and the quantum entanglement faded. By his first birthday, Ethan was just a normal, happy child with an extraordinary story about his first few months of life. Victoria watched her son play with toys that would teach him physics principles most humans learned in university, gifts from the coalition designed to accelerate human development. She thought about the future Ethan would inherit. It would be dangerous with the harvesters approaching, but it would also be full of possibility. Humanity was learning to reach for the stars not as conquerors, but as participants in something larger. It was the future she had always hoped for, even if the path there had been unexpected. Gregory transformed his company into a center for adapting coalition technology to human needs. His quantum research, which had accidentally created the connection to the aliens, now led humanity's efforts to build the defensive systems they would need. He worked with governments and scientists from around the world, no longer motivated by profit but by the simple desire to ensure his son had a world to grow up in. His wealth meant little now that humanity faced existential questions, but his skills and resources meant everything. Dr. Chen achieved the dream of his career, direct communication with alien intelligence, and found it more complex and wonderful than he had imagined. The coalition consisted of 17 different species, each with their own perspectives and cultures. He spent his time learning their languages, their histories, their philosophies. He became Earth's ambassador to the coalition, representing humanity in discussions about defense strategies and cultural exchange. It was exhausting work, but he had never been happier. Linda went back to waitressing, but not at Lumiere. She opened a small restaurant of her own, funded by grateful world governments who wanted to honor the mother who had raised the woman who heard the stars. She called it The Signal, and it became a gathering place for scientists and dreamers, people who wanted to discuss the new reality over coffee and pie. She watched her daughter on news broadcasts, speaking at the United Nations or meeting with coalition representatives, and felt pride that went beyond words. Her baby had saved the world simply by listening when others could not hear. As months turned into years, humanity transformed. The knowledge from the coalition accelerated technological development beyond anyone's predictions. Clean energy replaced fossil fuels within 3 years. Medical advances nearly eliminated cancer and began reversing aging. Education transformed as children learned physics and mathematics at levels once reserved for graduate students. Social structures shifted as people realized that old divisions of nation and race and religion seemed petty when humanity faced threats from beyond Earth. Unity came slowly and imperfectly, but it came. The preparations for the harvesters' arrival consumed tremendous resources and attention. Orbital defense platforms were built using coalition designs. Quantum communication networks allowed instant coordination across the solar system. Humanity learned to build ships that could travel between planets in days rather than months. Every advance brought them closer to being able to defend themselves. But the coalition was clear. The harvesters were formidable. Even with all this help, the battle would be difficult. Survival was possible but not guaranteed. 20 years after Maya's first contact with the signal, she stood on a balcony of the New Earth Defense Headquarters, looking up at stars that humanity now knew were full of life and possibility. She was 42 now, no longer the uncertain young woman who had heard a crying baby and changed history. She had spent 2 decades as humanity's voice to the stars, and she was tired but satisfied. Ethan was in college, studying to become a diplomat who would work with alien civilizations. The quantum connection that had linked him to the coalition was gone, but the purpose it had given him remained. The harvesters were expected within 5 years. Humanity was as ready as it could be. The coalition had provided knowledge and advice and hope. But Earth would have to fight its own battle. Maya thought about everything that had changed since that night at Lumiere. The technology, the knowledge, the sense of humanity's place in a larger cosmos.